So Marcus, tell me what your definition of charisma is.
Okay, my definition of charisma is the ability to evoke emotions in other people. When we communicate with one another, we tend to, in this day and age, talk logically. Children talk playfully, they share their emotions with each other, but as we grow up, we go through school, we get older, we graduate, we become very logical communicators and we strip the emotion away from our conversations. So making the other person feel emotion is really what the source of charisma is, and the best way to do that is you feel the emotion yourself first.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Do you have a specific example?
Yeah, it's very simple. A technique you can use straight away is to use what I call a pre-frame. In other words, set the context of the conversation up before you start talking. So what that means in practice is if you walk up to somebody, say you're buying a coffee in a coffee shop and you say, can I have a coffee? That's a very logical conversation. But if you inject some tension by setting up a context ahead of time and saying something like, listen, I don't want to complain and I don't want to get you into trouble, but I'd just like a coffee, please. You'll create a little blip of emotion, an emotional spike, because you've built tension in the conversation and you've released that tension. And that creates a little hiccup of emotion in the other person, and before you know it, you've started a conversation with a great impression.
I like that. You're kind of making an interaction which could be ordinary, and you're making it fun. And I see what you say by injecting that emotion. Marcus, what were you like before you got this area of your life handled?
Well, I started to look at changing this area of my life when I was at college, or at university is what we call it here. And I was the kind of guy who, I had friends, but I'd be in a bar, for example, and I'd usually be on the edges of the conversation. So perhaps my friends were talking to some people, or they're talking amongst themselves, and I'd look like I was at a Wimbledon tennis match, with my head going left to right, looking at the conversation all the time, but not really being able to get into the conversation as well. So I found that very tricky. It was very frustrating. I'd also be in situations like if I was on a train or a bus, or in the cafeteria, in the lunch hall, and I'd feel a bit, I'd feel a lot of anxiety. Wanting to talk to people, and I did want to talk to people, not all the time, but there were certain times when I wanted to express myself and I'd stop myself because I'd feel nervous. This is something that would often play out when I was down the gym, when somebody was on the bit of equipment I really wanted to use, and I kind of feel a bit sort of nervous to interrupt them. So I knew I wasn't happy where I was. It was a lot of anxiety and frustration I was carrying around, and that's why I wanted to do something about it.
So for people who resonate with that, for people who have those feelings and they know they should take action, but they're just too terrified, what are some quick tips you have for things they can do?
Okay, well, I remember buying books on conversation skills and trying to learn, secret techniques that would allow me to just, have elegant conversations with everybody. What I think a lot of those books missed out, and something that I discovered, was really the moment you open your mouth is not where the battle is taking place. It's taking place the 15 seconds or so before you even start that conversation. So the first thing to focus on is what's going on in your mind, because this is the software inside your brain that's going to control the result you have anyway. So a few little things to consider are whenever I go into a conversation, I would spend time talking to people who I thought were the best conversationalists in the world, and many of them are still, plying their trades. They're lawyers, they're salespeople from all walks of life. And the thing that I found probably the best of the lot was doing is I said to him, why are you able to have such elegant conversations? And he said, well, you know what it is? Every conversation I've ever had has gone really well. So I kind of know every conversation I'm going to have is going to go really well also. So I said, well, that makes sense. You're kind of telling me you have a self-fulfilling prophecy going on, because every conversation you've ever had has gone well, so, every conversation you're going to have is going to live up to that. He said, yeah, absolutely. It puts my mind at rest, and you know what? Whenever I go and talk to somebody, if the first impression doesn't go quite right, I know it's going to end up fine anyway. So this made a lot of sense to me. The only problem I had was he was telling me that to get 100% success in talking to people, you already had to have 100% success. And there was a bit of a problem there, because although the logic made sense, it was a paradox. How do you get 100% when you're coming from nothing? And my experience was, I'd go and chat to people, and some of the conversations I'd have would go really well. Some would be so-so, and some would, be pretty awful, to be honest. And I was thinking, well, how is he so good every time? And then I realised what the solution was. And what it is if we go into an exam, I'm sure, Matt, you remember doing your exams at school, and the nervous feeling you may have got where all the pressure and the stress is on to sit in there and get a good result, or perhaps you've done your driving test. And,
Yeah.
You have that feeling of don't screw this up. That little voice at the back of your head. Well, we tend to enter most things we fear with a feeling of, a subconscious feeling of, this is going to go well, or I'm going to screw it up. It's there in the background. And I realised one day when a client asked me, he said, well, how did you develop this? I realised that when I think back into my mind, and when I think back to the last bad reaction I got when I speak to somebody, I couldn't find it. I couldn't find any memory of me having a bad experience. I was thinking, well, why is this? And the subconscious shift happened. Well, what I did is I looked at all the stuff that went really well, and I kind of assumed, or I kind of imagined putting all those memories into a filing cabinet. And I looked at the memories that would sort of quote unquote be ones that didn't go so well. And really what I found out I did is I almost got out a magic marker pen, crossed out on the filing cabinet, really bad experiences, crossed that right out and wrote instead really funny stories. So when I go into a conversation now, I think it's either going to go really well or it's going to go really funny. And guess what? One of those two outcomes happens. And so I take either of those outcomes, and that builds my 100%. Conversations go either really well or they go really funny. And by funny, I mean I look at them, I laugh at them, and I take that experience into my next conversation. For example, oh my God, you won't believe just what happened to me a minute ago. So the mindset before you begin is the most crucial thing to get sorted. Thinking this is going to go really well or this is going to go really funny. With regards to actually what you say, I'm going to share with you a technique that I've just sort of published on my website at the moment, but found it very useful. A little template.
Sure.
And it's simply this. What you do is you walk up to somebody and you say, that's what I like to see. And what that does, that gets their attention. It's very important you smile and you've got, a cheerful expression on your face, because people, as they look at you, they're going to take you in and they're going to make a decision based on what they see. The first thing they see is your smile. Smiling is so crucial. So you say, that's what I like to see, with a big smile on your face. This gets their attention, and you know when you've got their attention because your eyes and their eyes are locked on each other. The next thing you do is you look at what they're doing, you look at the scenario they're in, the situation they're in, and you label off 2 to 3 observations. So, for example, if somebody sat outside a bar at night by a table, you say, that's what I like to see. Sunset, got a drink in your hand, completely relaxed at a table, and you label those 3 observations off. And they're positive observations as well. Finally, you cap it off by saying, what more could you want? So, just to tie that together, you walk up, you say, that's what I like to see, 2 or 3 observations, and then cap it off by saying, what more could you want? What that'll do is that'll provide a pretty surefire 100% proof icebreaker that'll work in just about every situation.
I love that, man. That's awesome. That's a great way to spark up a conversation with almost anybody, and I think it helps people become more observant. And I love the way you reframe a situation to nothing goes bad. It either goes very well or it goes funny, because you're always looking at things as, it seems to me that you're always taking the situation and seeing, what can I learn from this situation, rather than, oh man, that was such a big mistake. Because you know what, I think you live in your own reality, and when you look at that and you frame it that way, I think that's a great help, man. So that's awesome. Thanks for those tips.
No worries at all.
So Marcus, is it a myth that people are just born with charisma, or is this something that people can learn?
Okay, well, I certainly believe it's something you can learn, because it's something I've learned. And if we look at our definition of it's the ability to evoke emotions in others, working from that definition, I travelled the world really to find out people who, to learn from people who I considered charismatic. In other words, people who made me feel emotions when I talked to them. Now, it's worth saying, is it better to feel good emotions or bad emotions? The truth is, it's best to feel all sorts of emotions. If you can make somebody feel a spectrum of emotions in your presence, that's everything. That's why you have people who are very introverted and they can instill emotion in people, and people who are very extroverted and they can also spike these emotions in others. So what I found is some commonalities in all these people, because there's different sort of types of charisma. As we said, there's the charisma of, say, perhaps somebody like Marlon Brando versus the charisma of somebody like Barack Obama. So what I found is the four main principles, and there's a few more, but the four ones I want to sort of specialize in this interview is, first of all, your attitude to life, having an outlook, because really you have very little control over how people react to you, yet you have full control over your reaction to their reaction of you. So I'll say that again because it's a bit of a tongue twister, but you have full control not over how people react to you, but how you react to their reaction. And I'll always choose a reaction that makes me happy. And what that does is it keeps me in an upbeat, positive mood. So put me in the worst situation possible, I'm usually laughing about it. The trouble is with doing this is I've evolved a very unique sense of humour, but it's something I love. So keeping upbeat, keeping positive is hugely important. The second thing, or the second aspect, is your ability to be spontaneous. In other words, pulling things out of thin air and being able to talk about them. Really, people run out of conversation because they're not listening to what the other person's saying. They're more interested in talking about themselves and getting their own thoughts and feelings out there to keep the conversation going. When really the trick is to listen to what the other person says, take it, agree with it possibly, and then build on top of it. So being a good listener is everything. And a little way to do that, to force yourself to do that, is to say things like, oh yeah, that reminds me, or hey, do you know what? Because that will force you to take what they've said and build on it. The third thing is charm. Charm is what I would consider an aspect of charisma, and that's making people feel comfortable in your presence. The two ways to do that are to be very forgiving when you talk to people. So for example, if you're telling them about your holiday to Israel and they're telling you about their holiday to Egypt, it's about letting go of the subject that you were talking about and letting them talk about themselves. So that's the first thing. The second aspect of charm is rewarding generously. So giving them compliments and approving of what they're saying. So that could be with a smile, that could be just repeating what they said back to them. Very powerful technique to connect with somebody actually. Just take what they say and paraphrase it back to them. So if they said they went skiing in the Alps, you say, oh, skiing in the Alps, that's a fantastic thing to do. It shows that you're listening, and people love to talk about themselves, they love to share their stories. So being a blank canvas that they can do that on is very powerful. There are some caveats to that, but hopefully we'll cover them another time. The fourth thing is being able to connect deeply with people. What I found is, it's great when you share a commonality with somebody. You both know a mutual friend, you're both from the same place. Really though, people are all motivated by the same emotion. It's not necessarily happiness, it's the feeling of freedom. So the feeling of freedom you might get when you're snowboarding is the feeling of freedom I probably get when I'm mountain biking. And so if we talk about emotions as quickly as possible, oh, how does skiing make you feel? Oh, you know what? Mountain biking makes me feel like that. We should totally do that sometime. That allows you to connect very powerfully. So that's four of the key components of charisma.
Wow, Marcus, I love that stuff. This is really great insights, man. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. Where can people find out more about you?
Oh, my website, yourcharismacoach.com. If you head over to there, you'll be able to download a free book on conversation skills, and I have a video blog there as well, update on that website. So yourcharismacoach.com is the best place to find me.
Fantastic, man. Thanks so much again, Marcus. I really appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Cheers.
All right, man. See you.
Bye.